They say evil can't come in unless you invite it. And I wish I had believed that before I ever touched the door. It began on a freezing night in my apartment, when the wind was rattling the window frames, and the silence was so deep that every little sound seemed louder than it should have been. And that's when I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow, heavy. Knock, knock, knock. At first I thought I was dreaming, because it didn't make sense. No one ever came by that late, and the hallways in my building were always empty after dark. Yet my eyes shot open, and my chest felt tight, and I could feel the hair on my arms rising, as if something was standing just beyond the door. The next night, it came again. And this time I forced myself out of bed, even though my legs were trembling, and I pressed my face to the peephole. And what I saw was nothing. The hallway stretched out, empty, still, dark. And I wanted to laugh at myself. I wanted to believe it was just the pipes, or maybe a prank. But deep down, I knew better. By the 3rd night, I was already waiting for it. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't relax, because my mind kept counting down to that hour. And when it came, my heart stopped. 3 knocks. Slower, louder, heavier, as if something on the other side was growing impatient. And against every instinct, screaming in my head, I unlatched the door, and I opened it. And the hallway was empty. But when I turned back inside, my stomach dropped. There were footprints, wet, muddy footprints, spreading across the carpet, leading down the narrow hallway, leading into my bedroom. And I just stood there, staring, my breath caught in my throat, because the footprints stopped at the foot of my bed. And for the briefest moment, I thought I saw the mattress dip, as if someone was already sitting there, waiting. I didn't dare go closer. Instead, I backed away, dragging a blanket with me, and I sat curled up in the corner of the living room, every nerve in my body burning. And that's when it happened. At exactly 3:15 a.m., my bedroom door creaked open, and something stepped out. It was tall, impossibly tall, its shoulders brushing the frame of the door, and its body looked thin, stretched, wrong, and its head tilted to one side, too far, like it was listening to the sound of my heartbeat. And then it spoke. It whispered my name. And I wanted to scream, but my throat locked, and no sound came out, and I buried myself under the blanket like a terrified child, praying that if I couldn't see it, maybe it couldn't see me. And when the light of morning finally broke through the windows, I looked up, and it was gone. But the footprints remained, clear as ever, leading straight to the bed where I'd once slept. I moved out within the week, convinced I had escaped it. And for a while, I let myself believe that maybe it was just a nightmare. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Maybe it was something that lived only in that old apartment. But I was wrong. Because even now, years later, I'll wake in the dead of night, and the air will feel heavy again, and the silence will press against my ears, and then I'll hear it. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, patient, and I know it's still waiting for me to open the door again. Some spirits can't rest until they've reclaimed what was lost, and I learned that truth the night I met the Headless Priest. It was nearing midnight when I dared to take the shortcut across the old cemetery, for I'd heard the warnings, of course, but I was tired of dodging long detours. The moon was a sliver above crumbling gravestones, and every step I took echoed in the stillness. The chapel stood at the edge of the grounds, abandoned and silent, with its wooden doors cracked and weathered. They say that once, during wartime, a priest was beheaded right there inside those walls. and that his spirit still roams, searching for a head that no longer belongs to him. Still, I opened the door. Inside, candles flickered in dusty holders, and the air smelled of old incense and cold stone. The silence pressed against me, heavy and unrelenting. And then I heard footsteps behind me, slowly, deliberately, and I felt watched. I turned. There he stood in the aisle, pale robe sweeping the floor, yet no head atop the collar. In one thin, shaking hand, he held something. A head. Not his own, but a human head, barely clutched, with the jaw slack and eyes glassy and unseeing. I froze. He walked toward me, and there was no sound but the soft scrape of his feet across the floorboards. I wanted to run, but my legs were led. He lifted the head toward me, and it wasn't just an object in his hand. It was a wordless memory, a plea. Then, as though noticing me for the first time, he lifted his neck stump as if sniffing for something. He spoke, without sound, a memory of a wordless longing. He tilted the head toward me, offering, or perhaps demanding. My mind screamed, and I bolted. I fled down the aisle, while the door ahead of me was swallowed by shadow, yet open just enough to slip through. I didn't stop until I burst outside, lungs burning and heart pounding, chased by cold silence. I looked back at the chapel, quiet again and still. But now I understood. The Headless Priest was not a vengeful ghost, but a lost soul, incomplete and cursed to wander for eternity, searching. I never returned to that cemetery, yet the memory lingers. Some nights, when I pass by old stone walls or silent churches, I feel him. Not malevolent, but forever sorrowful. They say, if you see a headless figure carrying a head at midnight, don't scream and don't taunt. Just acknowledge what's missing and offer a prayer. Because sometimes the most tragic ghosts aren't looking to scare us. They're just hoping to be whole again. Every old school has its secrets, and ours had one that no one dared to talk about. The third floor of the main building, room 3B. It looked ordinary enough during the day because the desks were lined up neatly and the chalk dust clung to the board and the sunlight spilled through cracked windows. But at night, it was different. I was part of the school paper, and one evening I stayed late to finish an article. And by the time I packed up, the campus was empty, and the janitors were already locking up. I rushed down the hall, my footsteps echoing, and that's when I heard it. Chalk scraping against the board. It was coming from room 3B. I froze, because everyone knew the story. A teacher who once collapsed in that classroom decades ago, and she was found lifeless. And her lesson was unfinished, and the chalk was still clutched in her hand. They said she never left. Curiosity pulled me in, and I pushed the door open, and the lights flickered once, and then held steady. The room was empty, yet on the blackboard, words were being written, slowly, carefully, as if guided by an invisible hand. Sit down. My throat went dry, and the nearest chair scraped loudly, as if it wanted me to obey. I backed away, my heart hammering, and then I heard it again. Not chalk this time, but footsteps. Soft, deliberate, pacing across the back of the room. I turned. And there she was. A woman in a faded dress, and her hair was tied back neatly, but her face was blurred, smudged like an erased drawing. She carried a piece of chalk in one hand, tapping it against her palm. Tap, tap. She looked at me, or at least I felt her gaze even without features, and then she pointed at the board. Sit down. The words glowed faintly. I ran. I sprinted down the hallway, and I didn't dare look back, and every shadow stretched long and alive. When I reached the gate, I swore I still heard it, the scrape of chalk following me into the night. The next morning, I told my classmates what happened, and they laughed and they said room 3B had been locked for years. But when I passed by the door later, the sunlight spilling through the small glass window, I froze. Because on the blackboard inside, in perfect handwriting, one sentence was waiting for me. Next time, don't run.